without any further ado, I've brought my dear friend Ray. Yes, my dear friend. I've brought him in to talk about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So 3 outer planets that are the furthest away from the Earth. Ray's going to wax eloquent as only Ray can do, and I'll just let him go for it.
The question most people have about astrology or their astrological sign is how come it works? Once they get in touch with a view of their astrological chart, then how do you make the connection? I mean, we know about the relationship of the cosmos to the chakras in a certain kind of way, but from an astrological perspective, it's really important to understand that your astrology begins with your first breath. And when you take in that breath, you take in literally more atoms or molecules, I don't know which, more than they are stars in the known solar system. And what that turns out to be, as it enters your lungs and expands them and you cry, you've just been anointed with your spiritual DNA. And over time, the biological DNA, with all of its pluses and minuses and things that are turned on or turned off, get to meet their spiritual guide in one way or another through the process of the development of their life. So we could go into all kinds of different things like transits and all of that, but I'm going to avoid that and just start with this idea that the zodiac itself is an electromagnetic field that is there to support everything that goes into what this cosmos is trying to do through every solar system, is to create and manifest life. Scientists around the world in one way or another have come to the conclusion that the cosmos is a great thought, and that in that thought is this idea of life. And scientists have already discovered, for all in practical purposes, that the universe is fine-tuned for the support, creation and support of life. So just the fact that you're born means that you're part of that. And learning how to connect your conscious awareness to that part is what the role of astrology is. So we have to begin with the sun. And the symbol for the sun is that the sun is right here in the center, and this represents the entire solar system. So the sun, for all intents and purposes, is your creator. Imagine being without the sun being. Impossible. Wouldn't happen. Not here. Somewhere else, maybe, in some different kind of a way. So this represents the whole idea of consciousness. And so if that's the case, every time you look up in the sky, you're doing or understanding in some kind of visceral way what physicists are trying to discover when it comes to non-local consciousness. We're discovering that consciousness does not originate here. Your brain, your crown chakra, is like a fish gill where you are swimming in this consciousness, in this thought process, and comes in and goes out, comes in and goes out. And your job over time is to become more and more conscious of that and begin to be more discriminating about which thought you will give life to and which thought you won't. And you have to be very clear about that in terms of it being a natural process rather than something you have to go and find a system. Although that helps, whatever system you really feel like you need will help if you are doing it because you know what you're doing. But if you take a system to try and arrange your consciousness in a way that is more supportive of your ego needs, then you get into trouble. So when you get into the ego, what you're really seeing with the ego, and the ego is the moon. If you look at the planets as the prenatal condition of the sun, if you understand that the way the sun was created was out of the death of a star that spilled its guts into a cosmic field of gases that started revolving as a result of that, and gradually the gravitational forces create a nuclear fusion. And out of that comes consciousness, and that's what we are trying to stay in touch with, all right? So the moon's job is to serve that spirit, because the sun is not only consciousness, but it's your spirit. It is the whole thing that animates everything about you. The way you think, the way you feel, the way you walk, the way you talk. Every aspect of your life is animated by the sun. And the moon, being the ego, is surrounded with all kinds of ideas about how they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to think, what they're supposed to do. Because when you're born as a spirit in a body, and that body is what people see, and they have opinions about it, and in the first 10 years of your life, your ego structure is created by all you took in. And you have completely wide open, there's no defenses, no filters, nothing, it all goes into your ego. So the ego is constantly struggling with everything that was put into it. But the moon's function, even as the ego, is to discover, like a thermometer, what's going on in the world. And that gives you a reason why you're here. What is the function of the ego? What is your function in being, right? So the relationship between the two in your chart, the sun and the moon, will tell you a lot just by looking at that. And then you can see, of course, how the moon represents the child as well. The child is a product of human interaction, and interaction with one another and interaction with the cosmos, because after all, the cosmos is a living organism and every solar system is a living cell, and the moon goes around the earth like so, creating kind of a yolk out of which life begins to form. Now, this zodiac idea that we've been dealing with, I think it's important to look at it this way to find out why it is that it even affects you the way that it does. Aside from the sun, you have Mercury and Venus that the earth revolves around. And so these two planets represent in every way the way that you think and the way that you evaluate everything. And that is your internal quantum zodiac, where the zodiac is in you in a way that the physicists today might call quantum entanglement. If Saturn moves there, it moves here. If Mercury does this, it does this. Everything, you are in constant synchronous relationship with the solar system, whether you realize it or not. And your actions can be different, because you can choose to either not think or not care because of whatever reason, external circumstances that may have developed in your life. But that quantum zodiac, this is the electromagnetic field that we're talking about. The consciousness So the consciousness begins to become a mental thing and a thing of some sort of value to you. And then there's the Earth. So Venus and Mercury think and evaluate how Mars is supposed to act. And Jupiter gives Mars a sense of direction. But in between Jupiter and Mars, you have all these asteroids. And they sort of take Mars in all kinds of different directions, because Mars is always looking, the desire to fulfill the values that the consciousness finds valuable. Mars needs to have some overview, which is what Jupiter is, some sense of direction. And once you have that sense of direction, you have to deal with these little asteroids in the middle. All of them are, not all of them, but the major ones are named after female goddesses in mythological terms, right? And when you get lost, the goddess can help you find the way, because she pushes you this way and that until it happens. And then you begin to realize, oh, I need to know where I'm going, because I feel Saturnized, I feel limited, right? So all of these planets, from Mercury out to Saturn, represents what we call separation consciousness, because for thousands of years the furthest known planet that you could see with your eyes was Saturn. And over time, the whole mythological process of Saturn became, Kronos became the killer. Kronos castrates Uranus, which is Uranus, right? And tries to keep everything within the boundaries of the past. So the discovery of Uranus in the, I believe, 18th century, 17 something, just after the American Revolution, Uranus was discovered. And to really understand in graphic terms what that really means, if you look at Saturn in this way, you see that when Uranus comes along, there is an extension of something that really allows the Saturnian existence to be integrated into a greater whole. So anything that you see in your chart that involves Uranus is related to Saturn in the sense of like looking at your separation consciousness through the lens of like you're you, and I'm me, and we just accidentally happen to be here. There's no accident at all. We're all sort of, if the big God in our life was the liver, and each of us were liver cells and didn't know it, some fool comes along and says, I believe in the liver. Everybody laughs at him. So you have to believe clearly in the fact that you must be part of something bigger than yourself, because you can't look at the events in your life in a way that doesn't include that. Because if you do it that way, then what you end up being is Saturnized, made into half a person, half a being that you really want to be. So the idea of Saturn is this is the personal side, and it goes from Mercury to Saturn, as we said, the personal sense of separation. And that's all kind of a relative thing, because on one level, you have to live in that kind of world where, you know, I have to call you to make an appointment. I can't just think of, hey, I'm talking to you in my head, I want an appointment. That's unfortunately not the situation, because we need, first of all, Mercury. We need to be able to communicate who we are. And if we see ourselves as separate, then we're not able to make the transformation in terms of our personal acceptance of being part of something. It sort of gives that moon, and the moon, as far as Saturn is concerned, the moon is contained by Saturn. Saturn is the formative structure, and the ego fits into that and it says, I am so-and-so, I'm Ray, I'm a man, I was born in 1941, and blah, blah, blah. But you're here to become more than human. Because why should this be the end of the road? Who says it's the end of the road? The kings and queens and patriarchs and patriarchal value system and everything that we're living in says that's the end of the road. We're the epitome, we're the top of evolution. Absolutely false. We're in the process of spiritualizing our consciousness in a cooperative way. And if we don't cooperate with that, then the problems that we have result from that. And some of the problems we have don't appear to be problems. You can be rich. Not a problem. You've got no problem, well, except you're creating a lot for other people. So Uranus wipes out the idea that there are other people. Everybody is connected in a group that is transforming. The whole transformation of humanity is involved, and you as a human being are involved and included in that. So once it's clear that Uranus has come along and tapped you on the shoulder and said, psst, hey, would you like to come out and meet the rest of yourself? Would you like to incorporate the rest of yourself into your life? Or do you want to continue to be this separate ego structure that lives fundamentally in a state of what appears to be illusion? Here's why it appears to be illusion. And we're going to go and understand a little bit about Neptune when you talk about illusion. To cut to the chase, your energy bodies. That's all. It's all energy. It is completely, totally not visible. What it is light waves bouncing off energy fields. And it goes in through your eyes, goes through a thing called the optic chiasm, and in there, the whole idea of existence is in this hologram. What you see when you look at me is a hologram in your head. I'm out here in an energy field way, so all of us. But those energy fields are all part of the great liver or the great whatever it is that humanity needs to evolve into. And so at a certain point you run into a crisis, because if this Uranian energy is misused, there's the egoic use of anything, and then there is the awakened use of everything. And once you're awake to your spiritual being, then you can act the part of being some part of the spirit and allow that spirit to speak to you. But if you fail to do that in some kind of way, the negative aspect of an egoic Neptune is pain and suffering, and you end up either doing a lot of drugs or feeling guilty about every breath you take. When the awakened Neptune realizes that Uranus has shaken up the whole bowl of jelly, and all of a sudden you realize you're one with the cosmos. But you still have Saturn and Jupiter and Mars and the Earth and Venus and so forth, because those are your chakras. Those are your energy centers. Because when you took that first breath, just like stem cells know where to go and do what. I mean, whoever figured out how human beings are created? It's just amazing. Those developments after the first impregnation, the cells come from the mental brain part, and it directs everything. So there's a spiritual development that you are a part of in being born. And so the idea of Uranus is to connect you to that larger, more spiritual version of who you are, so that you don't feel so alone, that you know you're part of something. But your journey in life is to find that part of what you are a part of. Once that happens, then it's possible for you then to really see things from a point of view of great compassion, not only for yourself and the troubles you had to go through to get there, but also the compassion for others who are still in that separation consciousness state. You have to relate to them in some kind of way, and it has to be compassionate. You have to gently nudge, in some cases kick into place, or help things move in the proper direction, proper sense of meaning and purpose for growth. So all of that produces something very interesting. If you look at it this way, here's the sun, and here is Uranus. The south pole of Uranus is pointed directly at the sun. So it takes consciousness and transforms it into a Neptunian state. And then that Neptunian state takes the spirit and brings it into its Plutonic state. And to understand that, you just need to know that the circle in your chart represents the spirit, and the cross represents matter, and the crescent represents consciousness. So when you look at your symbols in your chart, that's what that means. But then, it's thirsty. Now, where we need to be and where we are in one way or another is part of something. And everything that is related to sickness, worry, false kinds of success, being blocked and so forth, is because the person who is feeling that has not connected with what they are a part of. They're still separated, they feel autonomous, There are people that want to be absolutely free of everything, and they can pretend and actually feel like they are, but they never are. They're either involved in the transformation, or the transformation of the world goes on and they're left behind. So what we're talking about here in terms of the sun and what the Uranus's relationship to the sun is a transformation in consciousness. It can be a really sudden thing, but it's years in the making, but when it happens, it goes boom, just like that. So we just had Uranus enter Taurus a few weeks ago, and we're entering a 7-year period of the transformation of value. Taurus, everything that is important and valuable. That is being challenged to change toward a more practical and spiritual involvement with our life and our community. And so that means that, as I mentioned, you have to see that the result of that is you're aware of your social obligation, because, you know, what did Jesus say? Treat others as you would have them treat you. And Neptune says, what others? Everyone is a mirror of everyone else. And when we learn to accept that, we're Neptuning ourselves. And of course, without a clear understanding of the transformative nature of consciousness, and Neptune would be an egoic thing, and a person would feel lost, and they would feel like everything in their life is falling apart. Because Neptune, in that respect, is like a dissolver. It dissolves everything that is not real. So the result of an awakened Uranus and an awakened Neptune is an awakened Pluto, and Pluto functions to eliminate everything that is obsolete, that no longer needs to be. It may have been useful at some point in time, but whatever Pluto, whatever sign you find it in, that is what it's trying to do. Revive, bring it back to life, have it be something positive. And of course, you can use Plutonic feeling energy as a destructive force, a force of hatred, a force of revenge, a force of all those kinds of things. But that's obviously not a very good thing to do with anything. So the idea is, when you have the separation consciousness from Mercury to Saturn, all a part of Uranus, you see the idea. The idea is every separate being is really connected to something that is larger, and we all have mercurial ideas of what that is, but we need to really understand that we don't know. All we know is it's more than what we are, and humanity at this point is approaching a crisis point with regard to Pluto. And the reason for that is that most of the world is using Pluto in destructive ways, like the atomic bomb or war or pestilence or any kind of activity that is against humanity in one way or another, where it's killing one person or a whole culture or a genocide. So the Plutonic energy, when it's run by an egoic fear, then you have that. So the idea of transformation of consciousness is to turn Neptune into a compassionate sense of oneness, which will then allow the Pluto to bring things back to life, which is, we need to move beyond humanity. We need to evolve a new humanity out of all of that. So that's what we're all being asked to do with those outer planets. So just to identify them briefly, quickly, so you can keep them in your head or your mind. This is the transformer. Okay? And this Neptune is the unifier. And Pluto is the cleanser. and the eliminator. And of course it eliminates those barriers that the individual thought of being separate and individual and not connected are all connected. So Einstein also, I want to say something about Einstein. He said that the obligation and duty of mankind is to be able to overcome or free ourselves from the ego. The ego is still a tool, and it has to do what the spirit wants. And it has to find practical ways of doing that. So every one of us have an ego. There's nothing wrong with having it. It's just that it has to serve not itself, but the spirit which animates it in the first place, because the moon doesn't have light of its own. And then if you're able to integrate and transform a lot of your consciousness, then you have discovered your authentic self. You are including your connection and your ability to see yourself as part of the cosmos in a way that's really practical. You got to bring the cosmic consciousness into everyday life by the way that you eat, how you treat your friends, and how you love your enemies, if you will. Be able to understand that the difference between people who are awake and the people who are asleep. The old Sufi adage is, when you are in a situation where everybody around you is asleep, shh. You don't want to wake people up. You want to let them become transformed. And the only way you can do that is be a transformer yourself and relate to them where they are, how they are, but as you are, now authentically yourself. Okay, I think that's pretty much covers it.